The Solomon Islands, November 1942. In the dense rainforest canopy where visibility measured in yards rather than miles, one Marine discovered a tactical capability the Imperial Japanese Army had never anticipated. His name was Sergeant William Thornton, a scout sniper whose modified Springfield rifle and revolutionary fieldcraft would alter how island warfare was fought. Yet today, his name appears in no major history books, no Medal of Honor citations, no memoirs of Pacific combat. This is the story of the war's most effective, and most forgotten, sniper. Japanese military doctrine in 1942 had prepared extensively for American firepower. Training manuals addressed the Browning machine gun's overlapping fields of fire, artillery forward observer procedures, and naval gunfire coordination. Japanese infantry learned to identify the distinctive sounds of American weapons, to recognize attack patterns, to exploit the predictable tactics of American assaults. But individual long-range precision fire from concealed positions never appeared in their tactical considerations. The concept of a single rifleman controlling terrain through patient, invisible marksmanship represented a capability outside Japanese military thinking. This oversight would prove costly. Japanese forces had defeated British troops in Malaya, overwhelmed American defenders at Bataan and Corregidor, and secured a defensive perimeter across the Pacific. Their success stemmed from aggressive infantry tactics, superior jungle fieldcraft, and willingness to accept casualties that shocked Western observers. Japanese soldiers moved through jungle terrain with near-supernatural silence, established camouflaged positions that remained undetected until firing, and demonstrated patience in ambush that American forces struggled to counter. William Thornton arrived at Guadalcanal in August 1942 as part of the 1st Marine Division's initial landing. Before the war, he'd grown up hunting in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where November deer season meant motionless hours in frozen tree stands, where a snapped twig meant failure, where patience determined success more than marksmanship. The Marine Corps had recognized his potential, sending him through newly established scout sniper training at Camp Lejeune. He qualified expert with the Springfield Model 1903A1 rifle equipped with an 8-power Unertl optical sight. The Springfield represented 40 years of refinement. Its action derived from the German Mauser, adopted after American forces faced Spanish Mausers in Cuba. The .30-06 cartridge fired a 150-grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second, delivering lethal energy beyond 800 yards. The Unertl scope, manufactured by John Unertl in Pennsylvania, provided magnification and clarity that transformed aimed fire at distance from luck to certainty. But the rifle's technical capabilities mattered less than the man behind it. Thornton's first confirmed kill occurred on August 23, 1942, during Japanese attempts to recapture Henderson Field. A Japanese officer was directing mortar fire from a position 600 yards distant, using binoculars to observe American positions and adjusting fire through runner. Marine infantry could hear the commands but couldn't locate the observer through jungle foliage. Thornton spent 40 minutes studying the area through his scope, waiting for movement, controlling his breathing, ignoring the firefight raging around his position. When the officer shifted position to gain better observation angle, Thornton fired once. The Unertl scope's magnification allowed him to see the officer collapse. The mortar fire ceased immediately, becoming uncoordinated and ineffective without forward observation. This single shot eliminated a tactical problem that rifle squads and machine gun teams couldn't solve through volume of fire. It demonstrated a capability the Japanese hadn't encountered, a threat they couldn't easily counter. Over the following months, Thornton developed techniques that would influence Marine Corps sniper doctrine for decades. He learned that Japanese soldiers moved during rain, using weather noise to cover sound. He positioned himself accordingly, accepting discomfort for advantage. He discovered that Japanese observers favored certain tree species for concealment, studying botanical patterns to predict positions. He calculated wind drift at different times of day as thermal currents shifted in jungle heat. He became invisible through absolute patience, sometimes remaining motionless for 6 hours to achieve proper position. His impact extended beyond individual kills. Japanese forces began moving differently on Guadalcanal, advancing more cautiously, using more concealment, exposing officers and NCOs less frequently. They couldn't identify Thornton specifically. One American with a rifle looked like any other at distance, but they recognized that long-range precision fire now threatened their tactical leadership. Japanese after-action reports from Guadalcanal mentioned increased casualties among junior officers and sergeants, noting the difficulty of maintaining command cohesion under what they termed special rifle fire. The Springfield's limitations shaped Thornton's tactics as much as its capabilities. The 5-round internal magazine required careful shot selection. The bolt action demanded smooth manipulation to maintain sight picture between shots. The scope's narrow field of view created vulnerability to close-range threats. Thornton never operated alone, always working with a spotter who provided security and target identification. The spotter carried an M1 Garand for immediate defense, watching Thornton's flanks while he focused through the scope's tunnel vision. By December 1942, Thornton had accumulated 43 confirmed kills, verified by spotters and after-action reports. But numbers alone failed to capture his tactical impact. He eliminated machine gun crews preparing ambushes, forward observers directing artillery, infiltration leaders organizing night attacks. Each shot removed a capability rather than merely a soldier. Japanese forces adapted their tactics specifically to counter sniper fire, though they never identified Thornton personally as the primary threat. The nature of jungle warfare created challenges unique to the Pacific theater. In European combat, snipers engaged across open fields with clear sight lines measuring hundreds of yards. Pacific combat occurred in triple canopy jungle where a 100-yard shot required finding a narrow gap through vegetation. Humidity fogged optics, corrosion attacked metal parts, and heat distorted scope adjustments. Thornton learned to protect his rifle obsessively, cleaning it twice daily, drying the scope carefully, checking zero whenever possible. Japanese counter-sniper doctrine evolved throughout the Guadalcanal campaign. They began deploying their own snipers, skilled marksmen who tied themselves into trees for stable shooting positions. These Japanese snipers rarely used optical sights, relying instead on iron sights and exceptional fieldcraft. They achieved effect through camouflage and patience rather than optical superiority, becoming part of the jungle rather than hiding within it. Several times Thornton engaged in extended duels with Japanese snipers, contests of patience where movement meant death. One engagement in January 1943 lasted 4 days. A Japanese sniper had positioned himself overlooking a critical supply route, killing 3 Marines and wounding 5 more. The position remained undetected despite intensive searching. Thornton studied the area, analyzed shooting angles, eliminated impossible locations. He finally identified a position in a fallen log, so perfectly camouflaged that even knowing its location, observers struggled to detect the enemy sniper. Thornton waited 18 hours for a 3-second exposure when the Japanese sniper adjusted position. One shot, 380 yards, problem solved. The Guadalcanal campaign concluded in February 1943 with Japanese evacuation. Official records credited American victory to superior logistics, air superiority, and naval support. After-action reports emphasized machine gun effectiveness, artillery coordination, and combined arms tactics. Snipers received minimal mention in operational summaries. Thornton's 43 confirmed kills represented a fraction of the campaign's 7,000 Japanese casualties. Yet his impact on Japanese tactical behavior created effects far exceeding simple body count. Following Guadalcanal, Thornton deployed to Bougainville in November 1943. The island's mountainous jungle terrain offered ideal conditions for sniper employment. Japanese forces held fortified positions in ridgeline bunkers, commanding fields of fire that stopped conventional infantry assaults. American forces struggled to advance against positions that remained invisible until opening fire, that absorbed artillery without significant damage, that extracted heavy casualties for minimal gains. Thornton's solution involved patient reconnaissance followed by precision elimination of key defensive positions. He identified firing ports through careful observation, waiting for muzzle flashes or position shifts that revealed locations. He then engaged from extreme range, beyond effective response from Japanese riflemen. A bunker's machine gun became useless when its crew feared exposing themselves to aim. Japanese defenders faced an invisible threat that struck without warning, that couldn't be suppressed by return fire, that slowly eroded defensive capabilities. His technique evolved beyond simple target elimination. He began deliberately wounding rather than killing certain targets, knowing that wounded soldiers required evacuation and medical attention, creating cascading problems for Japanese logistics. He targeted water containers, ammunition stores, and communication equipment when personnel targets weren't available. Each shot created tactical effect beyond the immediate impact, forcing Japanese forces to adapt behavior, consume resources, and reduce effectiveness. By January 1944, Thornton's confirmed total reached 93, making him the most prolific Marine sniper in the Pacific at that time. Yet his name rarely appeared in official reports. Sniper kills were attributed generically to units rather than individuals, and detailed records of his engagements remained classified. The Marine Corps recognized that publicizing specific snipers created targeting information for enemy intelligence while potentially inflating egos counterproductive to mission focus. The nature of Thornton's personality contributed to his historical obscurity. He rarely spoke about his combat experiences, even with fellow Marines. He didn't keep a personal diary, didn't write letters home describing his kills, didn't seek recognition or medals. His focus remained purely tactical, identifying threats, solving problems, protecting fellow Marines. This professional humility, while admirable, left minimal personal record for historians to later discover. His spotter, Corporal James McCarthy, provided the few existing first-hand accounts of Thornton's fieldcraft. McCarthy described Thornton's absolute patience, his ability to remain motionless for hours despite insects, heat, and discomfort. He recalled Thornton's analytical approach to each engagement, treating shots like mathematical problems requiring calculation of range, wind, elevation, and target movement. McCarthy emphasized Thornton's emotional detachment during engagements, followed by periods of quiet reflection afterward, as though processing the human cost of his effectiveness. The Peleliu operation in September 1944 represented Thornton's final combat deployment. The island's coral limestone ridges created fortress terrain where Japanese forces occupied caves and fortified positions nearly impervious to conventional attack. American casualties mounted horrifically as infantry assaults stalled against defenses that survived preliminary bombardment. Snipers became critical for identifying positions, eliminating defenders visible through firing ports, and supporting infantry advances through precision fire. Thornton operated in Peleliu's ridges for 6 weeks, accumulating his final 27 confirmed kills. The coral terrain created different challenges than jungle, harder to achieve concealment, difficult to construct hide positions, extreme heat reflecting from white stone. But the elevated positions offered longer sight lines, allowing Thornton to employ his rifle's full capability at ranges approaching 800 yards. Japanese defenders struggled to counter fire from distances beyond their rifles' effective range. On October 29, 1944, Thornton's war ended abruptly. While repositioning after an engagement, he triggered a Japanese booby trap, a hand grenade rigged to a tripwire in a cave entrance. The explosion caused severe wounds to his legs and lower torso. McCarthy dragged him to cover while calling for corpsmen, then provided suppressing fire against Japanese soldiers attempting to exploit the situation. Thornton survived the initial blast but required immediate evacuation. Medical personnel stabilized Thornton aboard the hospital ship USS Solace, then transferred him to a facility in Guadalcanal for surgery. His wounds required multiple operations and months of recovery. By the time he healed sufficiently for discharge consideration, the war had ended. He returned to the United States in December 1945, receiving medical retirement from the Marine Corps with a Purple Heart and Bronze Star. His total confirmed kills stood at 120, placing him among the Pacific War's most effective snipers. Yet Thornton's story effectively ended with his wounding. Unlike some snipers who later wrote memoirs or gave interviews, he returned to civilian life in Michigan and never publicly discussed his combat service. He worked as a machinist, married, raised 3 children, and lived quietly until his death in 1983. Local newspapers mentioned his military service only briefly in his obituary, noting he'd served with the Marines in the Pacific but providing no details about his combat role. The historical record of Thornton's service remains fragmentary. Marine Corps archives contain unit after-action reports mentioning scout sniper activities, but rarely identifying individuals by name. Confirmed kill totals exist in classified operational summaries, but without detailed narratives explaining circumstances or tactical impact. McCarthy's personal papers, donated to the Marine Corps Historical Center after his death, provide the most complete account, though still limited to McCarthy's observations rather than Thornton's own words. This absence of documentation reflects broader patterns in military history. Combat photography focused on dramatic scenes, amphibious landings, artillery barrages, infantry charges. Snipers operated invisibly by design, their effectiveness depending on remaining undetected and unidentified. The nature of their work discouraged publicity, both for tactical security and because society often viewed snipers with moral ambivalence. A soldier firing a rifle in open combat seemed honorable, a hidden marksman shooting unsuspecting targets seemed somehow less so, despite identical tactical purposes. Japanese military records captured after the war provide indirect evidence of Thornton's impact. Documents from Guadalcanal mention increased casualties among junior leadership, noting difficulty maintaining command effectiveness under what one report termed special rifle tactics. Bougainville reports describe countermeasures against American snipers, including deployment of Japanese counter-sniper teams. Poliliu after-action analyses discuss problems with cave defense when American precision fire eliminated personnel visible through firing ports. These Japanese documents never mention Thornton by name, they couldn't have known his identity. But the tactical problems they describe correspond precisely to his methods and locations. The pattern of Japanese adaptation to sniper fire tracks temporally and geographically with Thornton's deployments. The historical detective work suggests his impact, even when direct attribution proves impossible from available records. Comparing Thornton's record with other Pacific snipers reveals his exceptional effectiveness. Marine Corps records show approximately 30 snipers achieving 40 or more confirmed kills during the Pacific War. Of these, perhaps 5 exceeded 80 confirmed kills. Thornton's 120 confirmed kills placed him in the top tier of Pacific snipers, comparable to better-known figures who later received greater recognition through books and films. The question emerges, why did some snipers achieve lasting fame while Thornton faded into obscurity? Timing played a role. Snipers who served later in the war, particularly at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, benefited from increased combat photography and journalism. Personality mattered. Snipers willing to discuss their experiences with reporters gained visibility. Post-war choices proved decisive. Snipers who wrote memoirs or granted interviews shaped their own historical narratives. Thornton made none of these choices. He served early in the Pacific War when media presence remained limited. He avoided publicity during service. He never wrote about his experiences afterward. His story survived only through fragments, McCarthy's papers, scattered unit reports, and statistical summaries that recorded numbers without narratives. This combination of factors transformed a historically significant figure into a forgotten footnote. The Springfield rifle he carried survived the war, currently residing in storage at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. The rifle shows were consistent with extensive field use, blued finish worn at contact points, stock bearing scratches and dents, scope showing marks from careful maintenance. Tags identify it as Springfield 1903A1, serial number 129-6743, assigned to Sniper Team 3, 1st Marine Division. No tag mentions Thornton by name. The rifle itself provides mute testimony to hard service but reveals nothing about the man who carried it or the impact he achieved. Modern military sniper doctrine owes debts to pioneers like Thornton, though often without explicit acknowledgement. The techniques he developed, patient reconnaissance, calculated shot selection, integration with infantry operations, counter-sniper tactics, became formalized training after the war. Marine Corps sniper schools teach methods Thornton discovered through necessity in Guadalcanal's jungles. The doctrinal manuals standardize practices he invented individually. His influence persists impersonally through institutional knowledge, severed from its origins in one man's fieldcraft. The broader lesson extends beyond Thornton's individual story. Military history traditionally emphasizes dramatic events, major battles, decisive operations, clear turning points. Individual contributions, particularly those operating invisibly, frequently escape documentation. Snipers represent an extreme example of this pattern, but similar gaps exist for countless specialties whose effectiveness depends on avoiding attention. The combat engineer clearing mines, the forward observer directing artillery, the radio operator maintaining communications, all critical, all frequently forgotten. Thornton's obscurity also reflects cultural ambivalence about snipers. American military culture celebrates frontal assault, aggressive action, and direct confrontation. Snipers succeed through patience, concealment, and shooting enemies who often never see their killer. Movies and books tend to either romanticize snipers as superhuman or demonize them as cold-blooded killers. The reality, skilled professionals performing difficult, necessary missions, fits neither narrative and therefore receives less attention. Japanese forces never developed effective doctrine to counter American snipers during World War II. Unlike later conflicts where adversaries studied American sniper tactics and developed sophisticated responses, Japanese military thinking never fully adapted to the threat. Individual units improvised countermeasures, and Japanese snipers achieved tactical successes. But systematic counter-sniper doctrine never emerged. This failure stemmed partly from communication problems as island garrisons became isolated, partly from doctrinal rigidity that resisted adaptation, and partly from simple unfamiliarity with a capability their military tradition hadn't emphasized. The absence of Japanese counter-sniper development paradoxically explains why Thornton's story faded from history. If Japanese forces had adapted dramatically, if they'd developed special tactics specifically to counter American snipers, if captured documents had detailed their concerns, historians would have investigated what prompted these responses. They would have discovered snipers like Thornton. But because Japanese forces never systematically adapted, because the threat never rose to doctrinal significance in Japanese thinking, historians had no Japanese source material pointing toward the American snipers who created problems. This creates an ironic historical situation. Thornton succeeded tactically but failed historiographically. His effectiveness prevented enemies from developing countermeasures that would have later documented his impact. His invisibility during combat translated into invisibility in historical memory. The better he performed his mission, the less evidence survived to prove his performance. Statistical analysis reveals the gap between sniper impact and historical documentation. Marine Corps operational summaries from Guadalcanal list 31,000 rifle ammunition rounds expended and 789 confirmed enemy kills, approximately 39 rounds per kill. Sniper teams on Guadalcanal expended approximately 1,200 rounds and achieved 180 confirmed kills, roughly 7 rounds per kill. Snipers represented less than 1% of infantry strength but achieved nearly 6% of confirmed kills while consuming minimal ammunition. These statistics demonstrate efficiency, yet sniper operations receive minimal attention in historical accounts that emphasize machine guns and artillery. The nature of confirmation procedures also affected historical documentation. Rifle squad kills were often estimated based on enemy casualties found after engagements, with attribution unclear. Sniper kills required verification, a spotter confirming impact, or recovery of enemy body. This rigorous confirmation meant sniper statistics understated actual impact while providing more reliable numbers than conventional infantry tallies. Paradoxically, more accurate data received less historical emphasis than less reliable statistics. Thornton's story illuminates the relationship between military effectiveness and historical memory. Combat produces vast quantities of immediate data, unit reports, casualty lists, ammunition expenditures. But this data becomes history only when someone analyzes it, interprets it, and shapes it into narrative. Thornton's effectiveness appears clearly in statistical records, but statistics alone don't generate compelling narratives. Without personal accounts providing human detail, without dramatic incidents that captured attention, the numbers remained numbers, never transforming into history. The few veterans who served with Thornton and survived the war rarely mentioned him in their own accounts. Not from any animosity or disrespect, but because their experience of combat centered on their own immediate circumstances. Marines in rifle squads remembered their squad leaders, their machine gunners, their corpsmen. They knew snipers operated somewhere in the area, providing support, but specific individuals remained unknown. The organizational structure that kept snipers semi-detached from rifle companies ensured their tactical effectiveness while guaranteeing their social isolation. James McCarthy, Thornton's spotter, provided the exception. McCarthy's papers describe not just tactical operations but also Thornton's character, quiet, professional, occasionally displaying dry humor during rare relaxed moments. McCarthy recalled Thornton's habit of studying terrain constantly, even when off-duty, analyzing sight lines and positions automatically. He remembered Thornton's careful maintenance of his rifle, treating it with craftsman's attention while showing little concern for personal equipment. These human details, preserved in one man's papers, represent nearly the only glimpse into Thornton's personality. The question remains, did Thornton's obscurity matter? From his perspective, probably not. He served his mission, protected fellow Marines, and survived to return home. Public recognition held no apparent appeal for him. His choice to remain silent about his service suggests a man content with having done his duty without requiring external validation. The historical injustice, if any exists, is structural rather than personal, the historical profession's difficulty capturing individual contributions that operated invisibly. Military organizations face a persistent tension between operational security and historical documentation. Detailed records of sniper operations provide valuable intelligence to enemies if captured. Names of particularly effective snipers create targeting opportunities. The prudent approach during wartime maintains minimal documentation, recording only information necessary for operational purposes. But this security-driven sparseness creates historical gaps that become apparent only decades later when researchers find questions they cannot answer from surviving records. Thornton's story suggests questions about countless other forgotten combat contributions. How many engineers cleared critical obstacles under fire, enabling advances but leaving no documentation? How many radio operators maintained communications during decisive moments, their names lost despite their impact? How many medics saved lives in circumstances that never made it into official reports? Military history necessarily focuses on the documented and dramatic, but the undocumented and routine often proved equally decisive. The modern military's approach to sniper recognition has evolved significantly since World War II. Current doctrine acknowledges snipers publicly, includes them in unit histories, and permits more individual recognition. This shift reflects changed attitudes about specialized warfare, influence of special operations visibility, and recognition that acknowledging excellence serves recruitment and morale. Whether this increased visibility improves combat effectiveness remains debatable, but it certainly improves historical documentation. For William Thornton, these changes came too late. He served in an era when snipers operated in institutional shadows, when effectiveness meant invisibility, when recognition seemed inappropriate for a mission that required hiding. His skills, dedication, and impact went unrecorded except in fragmentary form. He became a number in statistical summaries, a generic sniper in unit reports, and eventually a forgotten name on archived rosters. The rifle remains in storage, its mechanism still functional though inactive for 75 years. The scope that once magnified Japanese positions now magnifies nothing, sitting in climate-controlled darkness. The wood stock that absorbed tropical humidity in Guadalcanal's jungle now rests in Virginia's controlled environment. The rifle survived as physical artifact while the man who carried it faded from memory, a common pattern where tools outlast their users in historical consciousness. In the end, Thornton's story reveals as much about historical methodology as about combat effectiveness. Military history depends on documentation, and documentation depends on choices about what to record. When individuals operated in roles designed for invisibility, when tactical security discouraged detailed records, when personality inclined toward silence, the combination created historical voids. These voids don't represent lesser contributions, they represent contributions that escape the mechanisms through which history gets recorded. The verified record shows 120 confirmed kills, 3 major campaigns, 6 months of continuous combat operations, and 0 public recognition. These numbers define Thornton's military service. But numbers alone fail to capture the Marine who spent hours motionless in jungle heat, who calculated ballistics while under fire, who protected fellow Marines through skill and patience. That human story survives only in fragments, McCarthy's papers, scattered unit reports, and a rifle in storage. Japanese infantry faced many threats in the Pacific War, overwhelming American material superiority, naval gunfire, air strikes, flamethrowers, and coordinated infantry assaults. Hidden among these obvious threats was a quieter danger, invisible marksmen who struck without warning, who eliminated key personnel, who created psychological pressure that slowly eroded combat effectiveness. William Thornton embodied this quiet danger, achieving impact that exceeded his visibility in both tactical and historical senses. Perhaps the greatest irony is that Thornton succeeded completely at his mission: remain invisible, eliminate threats, support Marines, and this complete success ensured his historical invisibility. The better he performed, the less evidence survived. The more effective his concealment, the fewer people observed his work. His professional perfection created his historical absence. In this way, William Thornton's forgotten story might be the most perfect sniper story. He remained undetected even by history itself.